Do you love children's books as much as I do? If you do, you're going to really enjoy the conversation today with Tim J. Myers, a prolific writer and storyteller, and we'll be talking about children's literature and literacy.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program that encompasses a diverse spectrum of topics important to our community, which we hope will both inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy the program.
Since I love to read and tell stories for both adults and kids together, it's really an amazing thing for me because my children are all grown up and I don't get to be around little kids that often anymore.
Today our guest is Tim Myers, and I'm so excited to have you with us today, Tim. Welcome to The Better Part.
I'm delighted to be here, Susan. Thank you very much. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Well, it's so great to have somebody who is such a prolific writer and also a storyteller. Just a great combination. And I know that you write in many genres. Children's literature is only one of the genres that you write in. Can you kind of give us a little bit of a background on what you do? You write so many different things and so wonderfully. I would love to hear that.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the word prolific too. That can mean that a person writes a lot of garbage, but it actually is something that is true about me. I hope it's not garbage, obviously. I write for kids and adults, actually for all ages, for teenagers too. And for me, it's a big part of this is that I don't personally see any real differences between writing for children or writing for adults or writing for adolescents. To me, the literary challenges and the literary payoffs are the same, not to mention the payoffs in terms of literacy. And as you mentioned, storytelling and writing together are, to me, a very, very natural combination, which, of course, there are plenty of writers who don't do storytelling and plenty of storytellers who don't write. But they are obviously both forms of story in slightly different modes. So that's a big thing for me, too.
Yeah, and I know I have read your books. And
which I appreciate.
Thoroughly enjoyed them.
Thank you.
As I did when I was reading to my children. I love children's books. And I love when they're written well and when they're not written down to a level of, that's pablum. Your books are awesome. So much fun. And one of the things that I enjoyed so much was the vocabulary. Can you kind of describe your methodology in writing books for children to be read to children by adults and how that affects their learning processes and, of course, the whole literacy question? So can you kind of elaborate on that?
Sure, and I think this is a great question. I have to say I love the way you framed this, too. Clearly, there are some children's books for which a low level of vocabulary is perfectly appropriate. For example, for very young children. Also, some people have written wonderful books. Dr. Seuss is a classic example, using very, very basic vocabulary. The Cat in the Hat was based on a famous, Bennett Cerf, the editor, said, "Can you write a book? I don't think it can be done. It can't be interesting with this basic vocabulary." On the other hand, as you're suggesting, people often put artificial constraints on the vocabulary that they think children can handle. Now, what I especially appreciated what you're saying about my books is I tend very much not to write down, especially in terms of vocabulary. But the key element there is the fun element. If the story is engaging, children usually can handle a surprising level of vocabulary. A perfect example of this, I often, when I present at conferences or other places, do this little bit where I ask the people in the audience to pretend that they're editors and that I'm presenting for them a manuscript that's meant for fifth graders, so 10-year-olds. And I say, you don't have the manuscript in front of you, I'm just going to tell you about the manuscript. And I list some of the vocabulary from this imaginary manuscript. So it's words like volition and furtive, and I have a long list. And then I talk about some of the themes in the book. This fits with the idea of vocabulary. That bureaucratic inertia and a political situation where terrorism is an aspect of it, and all these things. And then I ask people, would you accept this book for 10-year-olds? And they almost always say no. And I say why, and they predictably say the vocabulary is too difficult, the concepts are too difficult. And then I reveal to them that the book I'm talking about is Harry Potter. And the examples that I put in front of them are all taken straight out of Harry Potter, even from the early books, which are less complicated than the later books. Well, we know these books were not only read by fifth graders, Harry Potter books are sometimes read by 7 and 8-year-olds. How do they deal with that? Yes, and adults. So how do they deal with that vocabulary? Well, the answer is that the story is so compelling that through context and other cues, the kids can handle that vocabulary level. And The Order of the Phoenix is 870 pages long. Now this is the power of story. So all of these aspects of improving literacy through literature, when you have the motivation, children are surprisingly good at it.
Oh, yeah. And they learn so much from the vocabulary and the context
Right.
of the story. They're so gripped by the story that in introducing some of these words that are kind of beyond their regular vocabulary, it's explained to them in the context
Right.
of this very gripping story what the word means.
Exactly.
And it sticks in their
Exactly.
brain. And
it's interesting, too, because you asked how I go about this. When I write a piece, my entire dedication, my first, I don't know what I want to say, my main impetus is to tell a good story. So I don't think, is this vocabulary advanced or not advanced? Is this theme too difficult? Now, it's not that I don't think about that at all, but my main thought is, how do I make a story that's going to be gripping, that's going to be engaging? So those other things, over time, you get better at kind of calibrating what the market will bear. So obviously, there are limits to this. You can't, nobody's going to write the picture book, My Days in the Subprime Mortgage Crisis. That's not going to make it for the picture book. There are going to be concepts and vocabulary that aren't appropriate to that. But I don't think about those things consciously when I'm writing. I work as an artist first. Then when I revise, obviously I'm going to look and make sure that I've presented this vocabulary, for example, as just one of the elements, in a way that children will understand. But even then, too, when we think of children learning language, children learn a huge amount of their language by being in the presence of adults and hearing adults' use of language. So I'm not saying that every 9 or 10-year-old understood the phrase Scarlet Woman, which appears in Harry Potter. I mean, that's probably beyond their ken in a lot of ways. But they don't have to understand 100% to be gripped by the story, to get most of it, as you said, through context. And then we've got a kid who loves a book, who's learning words and other things hand over fist, and is in all likelihood going to keep writing. And if it's Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling's a champion. It's a series.
that's right.
The likelihood that kid's not going to go to the next book is about nil.
Exactly.
So there's
and
a huge
reread
amount. And
the
reread.
previews. I know,
Excellent point.
even myself, I have read the whole series numerous times. And each time it's like
Right.
it's new.
That's
and
exactly right.
It's wonderful. So
I think my daughter has read the series over probably 8 or 9 times,
Yeah.
and which would seem a little crazy. And we're a family of readers, but I can remember Lord of the Rings was this book
Yeah,
for me,
same thing.
and I must have read it over 5 times. Over a period of say 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I read the T-Rex, If You Give the T-Rex a Bone. And I also read The Good Babies. Both of those, it's very easy for the adult reading it to read between the lines
Yes.
and to start conversation with the child.
Absolutely.
And elaborate on what's in the book. And with Give a T-Rex a Bone, it reminded me so much of reading to my children when they were 3, about dinosaurs, and how they learned the proper pronunciation of the names of the dinosaurs. They remembered it when they were playing with their little toys. They were calling them the exact right names. They learned so much from that process of reading to them and talking about the environment that the dinosaur was living
Exactly.
in. And yet this is an adventure story. I mean, the little boy is running from
Right.
these different dinosaurs, but learning so much about the what it would have been like back then. And then
Right.
at the end, I think it's so great. At the end, you have the part that gives the adult reading the proper pronunciation so
Right,
that we can
right.
pronounce it correctly while we're reading out loud, and a little bit of the science behind it
Mm-hmm.
and all of that, so that it's almost like you're helping the adult teach the child in a fun way.
And this means a lot to me too. For most of my children's books, not all of them, but for most of them, my aim is actually to write a book that an adult can love as much as a child. And I love adult literature, so I just finished Wolf Hall and I've read Ulysses. I love adult literature, but I love children's literature as this same person that I am, if it's well done. So this idea of sparking conversations between adults and children is at the heart of it. So part of my, I don't want to call it trickery, but if I can get an adult interested in a book, sometimes by appealing to the child and the adult, and sometimes just by the general, engagement level of the literature, then those conversations are going to take place, and those are incredibly enriching.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something too that's a big deal for me. When we look at vocabulary, some of the assumptions that people make are faulty when it comes to what children can handle. One particular one is the longer a word, the harder it is for a kid to handle it. And this is absolutely untrue. I mean, it's the whole big word thing. We think it's a big word, so it's harder. As an example of a big word that children don't have any trouble handling, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. It's in a context, it has a meaning, it has a fun to it, a sound to it. One of my books is called Let's Call 'em Loud, Villy Villy, Huma Huma, Nuka Nuka, Nuka Nuka, Apua, Oi Oi. And I wrote that book, the moment of inspiration came when I had learned that there was a fish in Hawaiian waters, which is actually, I believe, the state fish of Hawaii, called the Huma Huma, Nuka Nuka, Apua. So it's a big word. Well, I taught it to my kids immediately because we all had so much fun saying it.
Yeah, yeah.
So the book is filled with some of these long words. Kids not only don't have trouble with the long words when they're presented in a fun story-based context, they positively relish the sound fun of language.
Yes.
And that's another reason. Reading these books, picture books, have this amazing aspect to them that most books do not. They're primarily meant to be read aloud. And that means I get to have so much fun playing with sound, playing with word sounds. And children tend to love that. And adults tend to love that too. I don't mean just mine, but I mean if I'm successful, they do. In general, and this is, by the way, one of the reasons that rap is so popular.
Oh, yeah.
People love the sound of spoken language.
Yes.
Especially when it's skillfully
And
done.
it works in the brain. You
Yes.
remember the sound, the cadence, rhyme. I mean, that's why Dr. Seuss was, I grew up with Dr. Seuss being one of the very first books that I learned to read before I was in kindergarten. And it was because of that, the sound, the rhymes, the cadence,
Exactly.
that works with the brain.
Absolutely,
And
it
so
does.
that's where the literacy piece really comes in. If we're going to be raising our children so that they can read and write, that's a brain function.
Absolutely
And
right.
why not do it with fun?
Well, in fact, we can push it even further. If you do it with fun, you are far more likely to be successful as a parent, as a teacher, as any adult working with children. You are far more likely to be successful with their literacy habits. For example, I think most people would agree, even though relatively few Americans read poetry, I think a lot of people would agree that's would be a sign of literacy. Because I'm a poet, my sense of this sound of language is heightened. I mean, that's one of the things poets have. So I'm able to indulge that in a huge way in my work for children. Some are more sound oriented than others. Some books, it depends on the piece. But the point there is that natural love of sound in childhood, so that kids love things like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers and supercalifragilistic and all the rest. When you tap into that, you tap into the natural motivation of human beings for language. Yes. Our natural motivation for language often gets beaten out of us or withers on the vine. And people often, by the time they're in high school, they don't like, I have to write for this class, I don't like the literature I'm reading, we over dissect it. it's a very, very natural thing. And again, rap is a beautiful example. Nobody said to the earliest rappers, you should present a form of high literature to the masses so that they rap because they love the sound of spoken language. So my overall point here, pardon me, is that the role of motivation in promoting literacy is often underappreciated. Children's books are one of the, I've made this argument many times, picture books are one of the keys to the future of America. They are not just something that you give a kid to keep the kid quiet or that'll entertain the kid. We're talking about literacy and all that it has to offer. And this is one of the strongest ways to begin it.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned picture books. The artwork in your books is beautiful.
I'm very lucky.
Different artists illustrating these different books. It's actually beautiful art.
It is beautiful art.
It's not, I'm an artist, I know art. I was just drawn in by these beautiful illustrations. And again, it's something that as an adult you can look at this and you can go deep into it, and you can point out with the kid, you know, and talk about the different things that you're seeing and ask the questions and help them learn how to observe in art and visual pictures to really get into the story that the illustrations are telling, as well as the story that the words are telling.
Again, Susan, this is a great point. And this point also fits perfectly with what we've been talking about previously. The art in children's books, for example, this book and some of my others, the art can easily be said to have made primarily for children. So there's a slightly, I'm going to use the word cartoonish, and I don't mean that in a negative way to these. I absolutely love the illustrations to this book by Mackie Pimentuan, who is to me a super talented artist.
Oh, they're so fun.
Some of my other children, I mean, look at this one. The guy's, when I saw these, I just about died. They were so wonderful. Some of my others have art that's much more oriented, agelessly oriented. For example, Oki Han, who did Bosco and the Fox and Bosco and the Riverstones, her art is fine art and will be at any level. I have a new book coming out. I'm so excited about this, by a wonderful artist and Native American, an expert in Native American culture, Winfield Coleman, who lives in San Francisco. And again, his artwork and his knowledge of Native American. My point here is that this is art, period.
Yes.
Whether it's for children or children or adults together, it doesn't matter. And that, your point that I love so much is this combination that makes the picture book so powerful is putting the visual with text. Mm-hmm. So language and art together are incredibly powerful. And it's not only helping, I mean, we're not only talking about improving the literacy of children, we're talking about improving their very mode of existence. And you said it, our ability to visually engage the world in a more intricate and a more appreciative way. This is one of the greatest gifts of life, and picture books can play a huge role.
Yes.
And if you're a child who's lucky enough to have a steady diet of picture books, then you are a long, long way down that road compared to kids who don't have it.
Oh, yes. And the humanities as a whole, art and the arts and the humanities are so important. And I have a degree in comparative literature as well as fine art, and I can't tell you how I so value that, because studying the literature of many cultures and the stories of many cultures over time really shows you how that enhances the culture. And what is culture but the people, the society of that time? So this is such important work that is so much fun, and it's such a pleasure to actually be able to speak with the writer. I mean, I have such a great, I love doing what I do. I get to meet people like you.
Well, vice versa, by the way, because I have to say, too, I know, too, that you work a lot in business, marketing, entrepreneurship. To me, and I hope this doesn't sound like flattery, I don't mean this at all. To me, you're modeling something that's incredibly important, which I think is something that tends to be fairly prominent in the Bay Area. I mean, we're sitting in Silicon Valley right now. Clearly, the humanities and the arts in some ways are taking a back seat to technology and science in American society today. And I'm not, the last thing I am is a neo-Luddite, anti-tech and anti-science. Quite the opposite. I believe in the balance. Now, a person like you who has a foot in both of those worlds, in the commercial world as well as in this world of the humanities, and by the way, you're talking to the father of a Berkeley comparative lit major, also an English major, and because of my storytelling particularly, your point about, of all the many things that I believe you're modeling beautifully in this point about culture is huge, particularly diversity. So this ability through the humanities, particularly through art, to understand other cultures, at least to some degree, and in as diverse an area as we live in, this is obviously even more pressing on a daily, practical basis. That ability is one of the absolute needs of the new globalized world.
Absolutely.
I mean, and we have seen, obviously, through history, how many problems result from ethnocentrism, pardon me, and ignorance on these topics. So here's a way, and I love the fact that you keep using the word fun. Here's a way for children at their level to have an experience that's pleasurable and yet be set on that road. To have this idea of other perspectives and other ways of looking at things. For example, this is a book about Japan. It's my made-up folktale in a Japanese tradition. It's about the famous Japanese poet Basho. The amazing art about Japan, which is very realistic, is by a wonderful Korean artist. Right away, kids are being exposed to an incredible amount of diversity, which also is good for adults who come on these books too, who also, all of us need that exposure.
Absolutely. And I would really love it, Tim, if you could read to us from one of your books. Part of storytelling is, like you said earlier, hearing the words. And it's always so great to hear an author read their own work. So if you wouldn't mind reading from one of your books.
I would be delighted.
That would be really great.
This book is called Good Babies. My daughter, who's now quite a mature and wonderful adult, was a horror as a child when it came to sleeping. So this book is about babies who don't sleep, but I turned it into a kind of a fairy tale. So in this book, just to set up this short passage, which I'll read, a family of trolls and a family of humans have each had new babies, but an evil witch has switched the babies, so the troll is now living with the humans, they think it's their baby. The human is now living with the trolls, and they think it's theirs. This is at the very end. But then the sound of a lullaby came to the witch. The farm wife had taken the knobby, rough-skinned baby from the high chair, and now sat with him in her lap, singing in warm, low tones. And his yellowish eyes were closed in happiness as he snuggled in her arms. Straining her ears, the witch could hear from far off a troll mother's lullaby too, drifting down in snatches with the wind from the mountains. And she knew the troll mother was rocking her own strange baby.
I love it. And we moms love our babies. Whether they're our babies or not our babies,
Exactly.
They're the best babies. That's so sweet. That was one of the books that I really enjoyed reading.
Thank you.
So, thank you for reading that for us today.
My pleasure.
Well, let's look at a clip of a book signing that you have done here in the Bay Area.
He's as bald as Mr. Shinetop, my principal. I climb a ladder to rinse him. And I love hosing down Quetzalcoatlus. Sometimes she sneaks a beakful and douses me. I think that'd be fun, especially on a hot day, right?
Yeah.
They're cool. We all sigh when Spinosaurus slogs in. His fin is 20 feet long and 6 feet high.
Oh, yeah.
That T-Rex is going to show up here soon, you know. I've had run-ins with it myself, Spinosaurus says, shuddering. I try not to think about it. I gotta be brave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
They are scary, yeah. Stegosaurus is finicky about his fins. Make him clean his dinner plates, he orders. Yikes. What if T-Rex wants me on a dinner plate? I'll be okay, I tell myself. Then the big guy shows up.
I know.
There he is, thudding down the street. A monster straight out of my nightmares. His mouth is big as a cavern. His teeth are long as daggers. His footsteps make the windows rattle. Towering overhead, T-Rex stops, turns, eyeballs.
can't wait to go hear you read more of your books. This
Excellent.
is just great. Tim, is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
I would. We've talked a lot about how important this all is to literacy. I think it's also important to bring up that it can be also incredibly important to helping human beings live their lives. So my book about the Hawaiian fish, Huma Huma Nuku Nuku Apawa, and the rest of it, actually underneath the surface is actually about children who come from parents from different ethnic or other groups. So in the book, the Huma Huma Nuku Nuku Apawa marries the La Vili Vili Nuku Nuku Oi Oi, and the question is, what will they name their child? At the end of the book, the child has his own name. He's called Hapa, which ironically in Hawaii is used to mean children from mixed ethnicity marriages. When the book came out, my editor had a friend, a young mother who had a 5-year-old boy. This is all in Hawaii. And the mother told my editor, who then told me that the mother read the book to the little boy. Here's a child who's thousands of miles away from me. At the end of the book, the last picture shows the little fish, and the little boy pointed to the fish and said, "That's me."
Oh.
So here's a kid whose parents are from different ethnic groups, who's identifying him. He's 5 years old. His identification may end relatively quickly. This is something that helped him live the life that he's trying to live in the world. So to me, this was an honor just beyond the telling. I can hardly say. I get the chills every time I think about that, because obviously as a writer, what I want to do is reach out and connect in some way. And for a moment, this kid whose name I do not know, I don't know anything about him, he and I connected across oceans and a continent for just a moment, and that was because of story.
Wow, that's great. It actually, you make a difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's
can.
great. Thank you so much for writing these incredible books. You have a few new ones that have just been released.
I actually have 4 new ones coming out. They haven't been released. They're still in the process, yes.
Oh, that's exciting. So when do you expect them to be out?
Because they're picture books, I have no idea. For example, this wonderful artist I mentioned, Winfield Coleman, is working on the illustrations for one. But obviously, once you've written the manuscript, you turn it over to the illustrator, and that process is time-intensive and labor-intensive.
Well, we will anxiously wait for those, and I know I've read several of these books, and I'm looking forward to reading more. And
thank you very much.
I feel very, very honored and blessed that you were able to join us today so that other people can know about these incredible books and about you, and how great it is that we live in the same area. I can actually see you again.
Right back at you.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Susan.
This has been just a wonderful conversation.